The morning Harrison Calder drove his '09 Dodge Ram van to the Kessler Group's quarterly site inspection. The rust above the rear wheel well had spread another 2 inches. He noticed it the way you notice a crack in a wall you've stopped bothering to fix. Registered, filed, ignored. He had 40 minutes to cross Millhaven before the roads clogged. A daughter to drop at school. And a lien notice on his shop that gave him 19 days to produce $218,000 he did not have. The van could rust. Everything else could not. What Harrison did not know, what he could not have known, driving past the chain-link fence of the Kessler Group's Northern Holdings with a travel mug of coffee growing cold in the cup holder, was that the woman conducting that inspection on the other side of that fence had never once looked at the property beside it, had never asked who owned the 34-acre parcel wedged between her company's newest acquisition and the river, had categorized it, in the one glance she'd given it 6 weeks ago, as abandoned industrial. A problem for later. She was wrong about the parcel. She was wrong about the man who owned it. And the morning those two facts collided in the parking lot of the Kessler Group's site trailer, with rain moving in from the west and her logistics director lying face down on the gravel with a sprained ankle and no signal on his phone. She was already standing at the trailer's single window, watching the rust-spotted van pull in, her arms crossed, thinking, whoever this is, they are not what I need right now. She had no idea what she needed. She would spend the next 3 weeks learning the difference. Harrison's shop was called Calder Fabrication, and it occupied a converted machine hall on the eastern edge of the parcel his father had bought in 1987, for reasons no one in the family fully understood. The original structure had been a textile transfer station. His father had stripped it to the bones and rebuilt it the way you rebuild a thing when you have no contractor and no deadline and nothing but time and the particular stubbornness of a man who does not ask for help. Harrison had grown up inside those walls. He had learned every joint and every beam and every place the floor still sloped toward the drain in the center. A ghost of the building's first life. The shop had 3 bays now. One held a marine decking project for a yacht refit commissioned out of Newport. Harrison had spoken with the client's name on his clipboard, a name his daughter had once seen and asked about because she recognized it from a documentary about America's Cup racing. He told her it was just a job. The second bay held a structural restoration for a municipal building in Burlington. The kind of contract that required tolerances measured in hundredths of an inch, and a fabricator who understood load-bearing timber joinery well enough to stamp his own engineering drawings. The third bay was currently empty, swept clean, waiting for the acoustic panel project that was supposed to arrive from a recording studio in Nashville by the end of the week. His daughter Nora was 7 years old, and thin in the way of children who move constantly, rarely stopping long enough for their bodies to remember they need fuel. She had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of gray that changed with the light, that looked silver in the morning and almost green by afternoon. She wore her hair in 2 braids that she'd started doing herself at age 5 and refused to let anyone else touch. In her left coat pocket, she kept a folded piece of paper, creased and recreased until it was soft as cloth, on which her mother had written the alphabet in the looping cursive she had used for everything. Nora kept it because the handwriting was still there, and the handwriting was still her mother's, and that was enough. The lien notice had arrived 11 days ago. It named a creditor Harrison had never heard of, claimed a debt he did not recognize, and listed a principal of $218,000 plus accruing interest from a contract dispute he had supposedly failed to resolve 18 months prior. His lawyer, a friend from before, from the other life, The life before the accident and the shop and the morning he'd walked out of Sutter and McLean with his name still on the letterhead and never gone back, had told him that the filing was technically valid, that the timeline was real, and that if Harrison couldn't produce documentation contradicting the underlying contract by the 19th day from service, the lien would attach to the property, and the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings within 60 days of that. 19 days. The number sat in the center of Harrison's chest, the way a cold hand sits on your chest in the dark. He drove with it there. He dropped Nora at school. She kissed his cheek, pulled one of her braids straight out of habit, and ran for the door without looking back, which meant she was fine, which was all he needed to know. And he drove toward the Kessler site with the rain beginning to spot the windshield and the radio playing something he wasn't listening to, and the number 19 still lodged behind his sternum. On the other side of Millhaven, in the 22nd floor of a building whose architect Harrison had once consulted on and whose curtain wall connection details were partly his, Vivienne Kessler was doing what she had done every morning for the last 9 years. She was making someone's problem disappear before the market opened. Today's problem was a structural assessment that her site director had marked as inconclusive on a $47 million acquisition in the Millhaven Industrial Corridor. She had read the report twice before 6 a.m. She had called the assessor's firm at 7. She had not raised her voice during that call. She never raised her voice. She simply asked 3 questions, waited for 3 insufficient answers, and then told the senior partner that the Kessler Group would be retaining a second firm and that his company's retainer agreement would terminate at the close of business today. The call lasted 9 minutes. The senior partner had said, at the very end, that he hoped they could revisit this. Vivienne had said nothing. She had simply stopped speaking until the silence became the answer. The thing her money could not fix was the way her father had died, not the fact of it, but the shape of it. Not the sudden failure, but the 2 years before it, during which she had watched a man who had built everything she touched go quiet in a way she hadn't recognized as disappearing until he was already gone. She had been building a portfolio. He had been dissolving. She had not seen it. That was the thing no acquisition could address. She drove to the Millhaven site in the rain with her logistics director, Martin, and they were 40 feet from the site trailer when Martin stepped wrong on the wet gravel, went down hard, and came up holding his ankle with a look on his face that told her he was not walking back to the car. She was already looking at the parking lot when the rust-spotted van pulled in. The van stopped 10 feet from Martin. The driver's door opened. A man got out who was not what she cataloged him as. Work boots resoled at least once. Jeans worn through at the right knee. Flannel with the elbow on the left side thinner than the rest, until she looked at his hands. His hands were wrong for the clothes. The calluses were the right kind for heavy fabrication work, but the way he moved toward Martin was not the way a laborer moves. It was the way someone moves who has done triage before and knows which questions to ask first. He crouched next to Martin. He did not touch the ankle. He looked at the angle of the foot, the swelling already building at the lateral malleolus, the color of the skin. He said, from that crouched position, not looking up, did it roll outward or inward? Martin said outward. The man said, then you're walking in a boot by next week. Nothing's broken. He stood. He looked at Vivienne for the first time. His eyes were the specific dark brown of someone who has been watching things carefully for a long time. She said, you're certain? He said, I did 2 years of trauma work before I went into fabrication. The mechanism's the same. He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. Then he looked past her at the site trailer. You're the Kessler inspection. She said yes. He said, then you should probably know that the water table under that north corner is 4 feet higher than your assessment shows. You've got 18 inches of clearance before that foundation starts moving. She did not say anything for 3 seconds. Then she said, "How do you know what our assessment shows?" He looked at the fence line between her parcel and his. He said, "Because I did the original drainage survey on this corridor in 2011. The aquifer hasn't moved. Your assessor didn't pull the county records." She opened her mouth to say something. She closed it, and then, before she decided to ask it, before she had made the choice, her mouth asked, "Who are you, exactly?" He had already turned toward the van. He said, over his shoulder, "I'll get Martin some ice." She stood in the rain holding the question she had not meant to ask, and it sat in the air between them, unanswered, like a door left open in a room where there had never been a door before. Martin went to the car with an ice pack from the van's first aid kit, and Vivienne stood with the site plans while Harrison walked the fence line in the rain and told her, in sentences that had no extra words, where her assessor had missed and what the county records would show, and what it would cost to remediate if she broke ground without addressing the drainage first. He was not performing expertise. He was reporting it. There was a difference, and she felt the difference, though she could not have named it. She asked why there was a van full of supplies parked at a site that was not a job site. He said he'd been heading to a delivery on this road when he saw Martin go down. He said it without emphasis, as though stopping was simply what happened when a person fell. She looked at the van. Through the rear window, she could see a clipboard on the passenger seat. She could read, upside down and through rain-spotted glass, 2 names at the top of the job sheet, a senator's name, and a family name she recognized from the Forbes list she'd reviewed last quarter as part of a philanthropy sector analysis. She was still reading when the back door of the van opened from the inside, and a voice said, "Dad." My zipper's stuck again. Nora was 7, braided, and entirely unconcerned with Vivienne's presence. She had apparently been asleep in the back of the van and had woken up and wanted her jacket zipped, and had opened the door as directly as she did everything. Harrison zipped the jacket. Nora looked at Vivienne with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned that this is rude. She said, "Dad says you can tell what someone's been carrying by what they do with their hands when they're not holding anything. What are you carrying?" Vivienne had addressed a United Nations working group. She had deposed 2 sitting board members. She had never once, in 9 years of professional life, been asked a question she could not immediately answer. She said, "I'm not sure." Nora considered this. She said, "That's okay." Dad didn't know either for a long time. She said it the way children say things that are absolutely true, without noticing what they've just handed to another person. Vivienne looked at Harrison. He was not watching the exchange to manage it. He was watching Nora the way you watch something you built that turned out better than you deserved, and his face held a particular kind of stillness that Vivienne could not categorize and could not look away from. She drove back to the city with Martin in the passenger seat and the rain on the windshield and the clipboard names behind her eyes, and she was tilted in a way she would not be able to explain to anyone, and she did not try. The man who arrived at Calder Fabrication 4 days later arrived mid-sentence. That was how he always arrived, as though he had been speaking for some time and had simply chosen this moment to let himself be heard. His name was Jeffrey Trask, and he was the managing partner of a real estate development group that held, among other things, the outstanding debt instrument that had been filed as the lien against Harrison's property. He straightened his cuffs before speaking, not once, twice, left first, then right, with the precise adjustment of a man who did it so often he had stopped noticing. He looked at the shop bays with the specific expression of someone who has decided the value of a thing before entering the room. he said, addressing Vivienne, who had come at Harrison's request and whose presence he had not expected. "I didn't realize this had become a social matter," Harrison said, from the workbench where he had not looked up from the joint he was fitting. "It hasn't." Trask turned to look at him the way you turn to look at furniture that is spoken. He said, "The filing is clean, Mr. Calder. 19 days was generous. I'd encourage you not to make this more unpleasant than it needs to be. Not with an audience." Harrison set the joint down. He turned to face Trask. His voice dropped half a register. He spoke at exactly the same speed he always spoke. He said, "The Meridian Capital account, registered in the Caymans under your wife's maiden name. Received 3 transfers between February and September of last year, totaling $1.4 million. The authorization codes on each transfer match the codes on the Harrington Amendment filing you certified as clean in March. The Sex Financial Crimes Unit has had a standing interest in that pattern since August." He paused. "The Millhaven property assessment your firm commissioned in 2022. The one that suppressed the aquifer data is still in the county filing system. It has not been amended." Trask's hands went still. "The attorney who certified your lien against this property," Harrison said, "is the same attorney who billed 340 hours to the Meridian account in a year when Meridian had no active cases." Silence. "That's 3 threads," Harrison said. He picked up the joint he'd set down. "You should pull on one." Trask's hands did not move toward his cuffs. He looked at Harrison. He looked at Vivienne. He looked at the door. He left without a word. Not composing himself first. Not making a final statement. Just stopping, and then gone, the way air leaves a room when the window closes. Vivienne stood in the shop for a full minute without speaking. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the second bay was the loudest sound in the building. She was aware of her own breath. She was aware that she did not know what had just happened, or how Harrison had known those things, or what any of it meant for the lien. And she was also aware, in a separate and quieter part of her mind, that she had watched a man dismantle a threat in 4 sentences without raising his voice, and that the thing she felt in her chest right now was something she had no professional category for. Harrison finished fitting the joint. He did not explain. He said, "I'll need to make a call." She pulled the county records herself. She knew how to do it, had done it 100 times on acquisitions, always through her legal team, but she knew the system. The 2011 drainage survey was in the archive under parcel ID 44 and 0087. The surveyor of record was listed as H.R. Calder, P.E. The engineering firm was listed as Sutter and McLean Structural. She recognized the firm name. She had used Sutter and McLean for 3 projects before they dissolved. She searched for H.R. Calder, P.E. in the State Engineering Registry. Harrison Robert Calder, licensed 2003. Structural and environmental. Last listed employer, Sutter and McLean Structural, principal engineer. Status, retired from practice, 2019. She read the citation attached to his record. In 2018, he had testified before the State Infrastructure Committee regarding load-bearing deficiencies in a series of commercial building foundations permitted between 2009 and 2014. His testimony had led to an emergency review of 41 structures in 3 counties. 37 had required remediation. The review had cost the state $180 million and had prevented, according to the committee's final report, an indeterminate number of structural failures. The contractor responsible for the deficient foundations was listed in the review's appendix. The parent holding company of that contractor was the Kessler Group's second-largest acquisition of 2014. She sat with that for a long time. She drove to the shop at 4 in the afternoon. Harrison was in the first bay. She stood in the doorway and said his name, and he looked up and she said, "Your testimony in 2018 triggered the review of the Linden portfolio." He looked at her. He did not say anything. She said, "The Linden portfolio is the foundation of everything my father built between 2009 and 2017. It's the foundation of what I inherited." Harrison set down his tools. He said, "Come with me." He drove her to a site on Crescent Road, a commercial building that had been shuttered since 2020. The parking lot had cracked along a seam that ran diagonal from the northeast corner to the center drain. The building itself was intact, structurally sound, remediated. He had certified the remediation himself in 2019, one of his last acts before he filed his retirement. But the lot was still cracked. And the crack ran along the exact line where the original foundation had shifted. And standing there in the late afternoon light, Harrison told her what had happened. He told it in flat, declarative sentences, the way he told everything. His wife, Alina, had been the project manager on the Linden portfolio's Crescent Road site in 2013. She had filed 3 internal flagged concerns about the foundation specs. She had been overruled each time. The building had been completed and permitted. In the spring of 2015, during a routine inspection, she had gone into a section of the basement to document a crack she'd been tracking since the previous fall, and the floor had failed. She had survived. She had not walked without pain again. In 2017, she had died from a condition that her doctors said was accelerated by 4 years of reduced mobility and chronic pain following the accident. She was 34. Harrison had spent the next 2 years building the case that became the 2018 testimony. He had not done it for anything the state could give him. He had done it because 37 buildings had the same deficiency, and 37 buildings had people in them, and the math of that was not something he could unknow. He did not look at Vivienne while he told her this. He looked at the crack in the pavement. He told it the way you tell a thing, when you have told it to yourself so many times the words have worn smooth. When he was done, she did not speak. There was nothing to say that would not be wrong. She understood, standing on that cracked asphalt, that she had been looking at him completely upside down from the first moment, and that this understanding was not the end of something, but the beginning of something she had not been prepared for, and that she did not have a framework for what she owed, or whether owing was even the right structure for what she felt. The afternoon light went orange and then gray. Neither of them moved for a long time. Trask had been quiet for 4 days. The kind of quiet that precedes a particular kind of action, not retreat, but repositioning. He filed an emergency injunction on the morning of day 17, citing procedural irregularities in the original parcel registration, and named Nora as a secondary interested party in the event the property transferred to creditor control. It was the kind of filing that meant nothing legally and everything strategically. A move designed to generate cost and delay, and to put something precious into the room where it could be threatened. The text reached Harrison at 6:42 in the morning while Nora was eating cereal at the kitchen table with her folded piece of paper propped against the sugar bowl so she could look at the alphabet while she ate. He read the text. He did not change his expression. His hands went still on the counter for 15 seconds. Then he called Vivienne. She arrived at the shop at 8. She had made 2 calls before she left her apartment. One to her general counsel, one to a former colleague who now worked in the sex enforcement division. She had the Meridian account documentation that Harrison had given her 3 days prior, reviewed by her own team and confirmed as accurate. She had the suppressed aquifer assessment, the Harrington amendment filing, and the billing records from the attorney who had certified the lien. The injunction had listed Trask's legal team and their firm's downtown office as the contact address for response. Vivian drove there with Harrison at 9:15. Trask was on the phone when they entered the conference room. He stood. He straightened his cuffs. Left first, then right. He said something into the phone about calling back and ended the call. He looked at them with the expression of a man who believes he is still in the room where he has always been in control. Vivienne placed the documentation on the table in front of him. She did not speak while he read. She watched his face. He read for 6 minutes. He set the pages down. He looked at Harrison. He looked at the pages. He said, in the quiet voice that had preceded nothing good for anyone in this story, "This is circumstantial. You'd need a cooperating witness." Harrison said, "The attorney who certified your lane filed a motion to withdraw from your matter this morning at 8 a.m. He cited irreconcilable conflicts. He named Meridian Capital in his motion." Trask's hands stopped moving toward his cuffs. They stopped at the edge of the table. They did not go anywhere else. The door to the conference room opened. A woman in a gray suit entered, identified herself to Trask, showed him a federal credential, and told him she had a notice of examination for documents related to the Meridian Capital account and its affiliated filings. She told him the examination would begin at 10 a.m. in the building's lobby-level office, which had been arranged for this purpose. She told him he could come voluntarily, or she could arrange alternative transportation. Trask looked at the table. He looked at the gray suit. He looked at the table again. He said, "To no one in particular, you've been building this for a long time." Harrison said, 18 days. Trask's hands did not move. He looked at Vivienne once, a look that was not a threat and not an appeal, but something smaller than both. Then he went with the woman in the gray suit. The door closed behind him. The injunction against Nora's secondary interest was withdrawn by Trask's firm at 11:47 that morning. Once it became clear that the attorney managing the filing had reached the same conclusion as his colleague about conflicts of interest. The lien was formally challenged by Harrison's lawyer at 2 p.m. The documentation was sufficient. The lien would not attach. Vivienne stood by the window of the conference room after everyone had gone. She heard Harrison behind her. She turned. He was looking at her with his hands at his sides and his face carrying the particular stillness she had seen in the shop on the day Nora had asked her what she was carrying. She thought about what he looked like to her that first morning in the rain, next to the rust-spotted van, and she understood now what she had not understood then. She had seen the surface of a thing and decided she knew its dimensions, and the thing she had seen was approximately 1% of what was there. She did not say this. She held it. His face was, in that moment, simply tired in the way of someone who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has just been allowed to set it down. She said, "Thank you." He nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair. He said, "Nora gets out at 3. 1 year later. Nora was 8. She was learning to read architectural drawings, which Harrison had not taught her on purpose. She had simply started doing it, spreading the site plans across the kitchen table and asking questions until the questions became understanding. She had named the recording studio panels in Bay 3 the Nashville family and checked on them daily until they shipped. On a Saturday morning in October, Calder Fabrications signed the contract for the restoration of the Crescent Road building's interior. The lien was 3 months gone. The property had appraised at 4 times the outstanding debt. The new contract on the wall, where the lien notice had been, was for a commission from an arts foundation, a structural installation, glass and reclaimed timber. Designed by an architect whose name Harrison recognized from the year he'd certified her first building's engineering. His hands still carried the same calluses. His face carried less weight. The specific thing that had lived in the center of his chest for 4 years The cold hand, the 19-day number, was not there anymore. In its place was something without a name, which was better. Vivienne's office had curtains now. She had put them up herself, choosing the wrong size and having to return them once, which she had not found frustrating in the way she once would have. There was a pot she used regularly on her stove. Her assistant had noted, with caution, that she had started taking lunch away from her desk. She had not explained this. On a Saturday morning, she drove to Millhaven and parked in the lot of Calder Fabrication, and Nora opened the front door before she reached it and said, without preamble, "Dad's in Bay 2. He's fitting the Crescent Road column mounts. You can help if you want. He says your hands are actually useful." She said it with the satisfaction of someone reporting a verdict they had personally lobbied for. Vivienne stood in the doorway of Bay 2. Harrison was at the workbench. He had not heard her arrive. She watched him work for a moment, the way his hands moved with a precision that had nothing to perform and nothing to prove, just the work itself and the particular attention it required. He looked up. He saw her. He did not say anything. He set down the tool he was holding and did not pick it up again. Her hand was near his hand on the edge of the workbench. Neither of them moved away from it. Some things do not need to be carried alone. Some things reveal their true weight only when you stop walking and turn to look at who walked beside you and discover that they were never what you thought, and that this, the looking, the turning, the discovering, is the only kind of coming home that actually counts. If you know someone who has been protecting something fragile for a long time and who has never once asked for a witness, share this with them. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and tell us this in the comments. If you discovered that the person you dismissed had been quietly carrying the truth that changed everything, would you have had the courage to go back and look at what you'd missed? We read every one.